The skies above Theros V had turned a sickly, unrelenting orange, the last vestiges of its breathable atmosphere clawing at the planet's surface. The once flourishing ecosystems, lush with sprawling bioluminescent forests and crystalline lakes, were now little more than brittle husks, a graveyard of alien life collapsing under the weight of centuries of abuse. Dr. Zaila, a xenobiologist, stood atop the glassy cliff of Resonance Ridge, her reflective, silver-hued eyes scanning the horizon. She was a member of the Xeni, a humanoid species with translucent, opalescent skin that shimmered under the light of their dying sun. To any outsider, her stoic posture might have been misinterpreted as calm, but beneath her serene visage, Zaila's mind churned with despair. She brushed a strand of pale, cerulean hair away from her face and sighed, her six-fingered hand trembling slightly. In her other hand, she held a crystalline data tablet, its readout flashing in harsh red letters. Biosphere collapse, 92% irreversible. Her world was dying. Not centuries from now, not decades. It was a matter of months, perhaps weeks, before Theros V became a lifeless rock drifting in the void. And she was powerless to stop it. Zaila clenched her jaw as she turned away from the horizon, forcing herself to descend the winding, jagged pathway back to her laboratory. The air here was thinning rapidly, and even her species' advanced respiratory system struggled to adapt. Around her, the once proud Xeni cities had been reduced to skeletal remains of glimmering spires, their inhabitants fleeing en masse to underground sanctuaries. But the sanctuaries would only delay the inevitable. Without a sustainable atmosphere, they would all suffocate. Zaila. The voice came from her personal communicator, a smooth, musical sound that carried over the faint static of failing connections. She tapped the device embedded in her forearm and answered, her tone clipped. "I'm here." It was Reinish, her closest colleague and an accomplished energy scientist. "You need to return to the lab immediately. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" "A ship, an unidentified vessel, just entered Theros V's orbit. It's not ours." Zaila froze mid-step, her heart skipping a beat. It couldn't have been a Xeni ship. Her people had long since abandoned interstellar travel to focus on their internal crises. And it certainly wasn't an automated cargo vessel from Theros moons. "An alien vessel?" she asked, disbelief tinging her voice. "That would be my assumption," Reinish replied. "We intercepted a transmission. It's in a language we've never encountered. But Zaila, there's more. The ship is broadcasting some kind of environmental signal. It's regenerating the atmosphere." Zaila's legs nearly gave out beneath her as the words sank in. "What?" "The air quality near the ship's descent trajectory, over the crescent flats, is improving. The flora there is beginning to show signs of regrowth." "Impossible," Zaila whispered. "Yet it's happening. I'm sending the coordinates to your communicator. Get there now. We need answers." The crescent flats were an expanse of shimmering black sand once teeming with glowing fungi and predatory crystal lizards. Now, they were barren and cracked, the land's vibrancy sucked dry by the environmental collapse. As Zaila approached the coordinates, her heart thudded against her ribcage. In the distance, she could see the alien ship, a sleek, silver vessel with a needle-like prow and glowing blue veins etched across its surface. It hovered silently a few feet above the ground, humming faintly. Surrounding it, to her astonishment, was a field of green. Grass-like plants had begun sprouting, their delicate tendrils reaching up toward the polluted sky. For the first time in years, Zaila inhaled deeply and found the air fresh. The hatch of the ship hissed open. Zaila instinctively reached for the plasma blade at her hip, though she knew it was laughably inadequate against a vessel capable of atmospheric regeneration. Still, her grip tightened on the hilt as the figure emerged. The alien was taller than her, its physique broad but undeniably humanoid. It was clad in some kind of exosuit, its helmet glinting under the dim sunlight. A voice echoed from the suit's external speaker. "Hello?" The language was strange yet oddly familiar. Zaila's neural translator struggled for a moment before locking onto the pattern. "Identify yourself," she demanded, her voice sharp. "Who are you?" And why have you come to Theros V? The alien raised both hands in a gesture of peace. Then, with a mechanical hiss, it removed its helmet. Zaila blinked in astonishment. Beneath the exosuit was a face not unlike her own, though its features were softer, the skin pale and smooth without the opalescent sheen of the Zeni. Its eyes were a striking green, radiating curiosity and intelligence. "My name is Dr. Adrian Clark," he said, his voice carrying a gentle accent she couldn't place. "I'm human." "Human," Zaila repeated, tasting the foreign word. "I come from a planet called Earth," he continued, his expression softening. "I was sent here as part of a mission, to find worlds like yours and help save them." Zaila's shock gave way to skepticism. Save them? How? What could one being possibly do against this level of collapse? Adrian hesitated, then stepped aside, motioning toward his ship. "If you'll allow me, I can show you." Inside Adrian's ship, Zaila found herself surrounded by an overwhelming array of technology. Sleek consoles glowed with holographic displays, their symbols and charts incomprehensible to her. But what truly caught her attention was the chamber in the center of the ship, a massive cylindrical tank filled with glowing, pulsating spheres. "What is that?" she asked, stepping closer. "Terraforming spores," Adrian explained. "Bioengineered organisms designed to repair atmospheric damage, detoxify soil, and rebuild ecosystems from the ground up. It's based on technology we developed on Earth after our own planet began facing ecological collapse." Zaila's gaze darted between the human and the tank, her mind racing. You mean to tell me this has worked before?" Adrian nodded solemnly. Earth was on the brink of ruin. Rising temperatures, mass extinctions, poisoned air. Sound familiar? But through decades of trial and error, we created a solution. These spores don't just heal the environment. They accelerate the process, restoring what was lost in a fraction of the time it would take naturally. Zaila's breath caught. If what he was saying was true, then... "It's not a miracle cure," Adrian continued, as though reading her thoughts. "It's a start, but it requires cooperation, effort, and time. Your world still has a chance, but the window is closing fast. I need your help." "My help?" Zaila echoed, bewildered. "Why me?" Adrian met her gaze, his expression earnest. "Because this is your world. You understand it better than I ever could. I can provide the tools, but only you can guide the process. Together, we might just stand a chance." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of hope ignited in Zaila's chest. But beneath that hope was a simmering fear. The Zeni people were proud, resistant to outside interference. Even if Adrian's spores could reverse the damage, would her people accept the help of an alien species they had never encountered before? And what of Adrian himself? Could she truly trust him? Zaila stepped closer to the glowing tank, her fingers brushing its surface. The warmth it radiated was almost alive. "If this works," she said quietly, "you might be the first alien in history to save a dying world instead of conquering it." Adrian smiled faintly, his green eyes bright. "I'll take that as a compliment." Zaila turned to him, her expression hardening with determination. "Then let's begin." Zaila wasted no time escorting Adrian to her underground lab beneath the ruins of the capital city, Entherakai, once a glittering metropolis of skybridges and floating gardens. Now, the city was little more than hollowed-out towers and eroded bridges that dangled perilously over toxic sinkholes. Beneath it, however, lay the last bastion of Zeni civilization, a sprawling network of cavernous sanctuaries lit by bioluminescent fungi. Adrian kept pace with her, his gaze darting from one ruin to another as they made their way through the broken streets. "Your world must have been beautiful once," he murmured. "It was," Zaila replied, her tone distant, "but our arrogance destroyed it." Adrian studied her as they descended into the underground sanctuaries. "What happened?" Her voice hardened. "We thought we could control nature. We mined the planet to its core, depleted its resources, polluted its skies. By the time we realized the damage we'd done, it was too late. The collapse was already in motion." She glanced at him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of the fungi-laden walls. "Tell me, Adrian, is Earth's story any different?" He hesitated before answering. "Not much. We made many of the same mistakes, but we got lucky. Lucky enough to develop the technology to pull ourselves back from the brink. It wasn't easy. Billions died before we found a solution." Zaila frowned, her mind grappling with the enormity of what he was suggesting. Adrian's people had faced extinction and survived. Could hers do the same? As they entered the lab, Reinish was waiting for them. The older Zenny scientist's amber eyes narrowed as he spotted Adrian. "This is the alien?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "This is Dr. Adrian Clark," Zaila corrected sharply. "A human, and he might be the only chance we have." Reinish crossed his arms, his six-fingered hands twitching slightly. "You brought him here without consulting the council? Do you have any idea how they'll react?" "I don't care how they'll react," Zaila snapped. "If we wait for the council to deliberate, we'll be dead before they reach a decision. Adrian's technology can restore our environment. We need to act now." Adrian, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "With respect, I'm not here to interfere in your politics. I'm here to help." Reinish glared at him. "Help? From an alien we've never met before, who conveniently arrives with a solution just as we're on the verge of extinction? Forgive me if I'm skeptical." Zaila sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Reinish, I've seen his spores in action. They're regenerating the crescent flats as we speak. The air quality there has improved by 23% in less than a day." Reinish hesitated, his skepticism faltering. "If that's true—" "It is," Adrian said. "And if you give me access to your planet's ecological data, I can calibrate the spores to target your most damaged regions first. But we'll need to work quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to reverse the damage." Reinish studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Fine, I'll help you. But the council won't be so easily convinced. If they see you as a threat, they'll have to go through me first," Zaila interrupted. Over the next several days, the lab became a hive of activity. Adrian worked tirelessly alongside Zaila and Reinish, sharing data and integrating his terraforming spores with Zenny technology. The process wasn't without its challenges. Theros V's unique atmospheric composition required extensive modifications to the spores, and the planet's heavily polluted water sources posed additional complications. Zaila found herself simultaneously impressed and frustrated by Adrian's methods. He was brilliant, no doubt, but his human tendency to rely on improvisation often clashed with the Zenny's meticulous approach to science. "Your calculations are off," she said one evening, pointing to a holographic display. "If we deploy the spores at that altitude, the wind currents will scatter them too thinly to be effective." Adrian rubbed the back of his neck, frowning at the data. "You're right. But if we lower the altitude, we risk them being destroyed by the sulfuric particles in the atmosphere. Then we need a delivery system that can bypass the sulfur layers entirely," Zaila suggested. Adrian glanced at her, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "You're thinking drones?" "High-altitude drones equipped with particle shields," she said. "We already have prototypes in storage. With some modifications, they could work." Adrian grinned. "Now you're thinking like an Earth scientist." She rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. As the spores were finally prepared for their first large-scale deployment, Zaila felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. The drones were loaded with the modified spores, their engines humming as they prepared for launch. "We'll start with the Black Scar," she said, referring to the planet's largest and most devastated region. "If the spores can take root there, they can take root anywhere." Adrian nodded. "Let's do it." The spores' deployment was an overwhelming success. Within days, patches of vegetation began to emerge in the Black Scar, their roots breaking through the toxic soil and purifying it. The air quality in the surrounding regions improved dramatically, and dormant water sources began to flow again. Word of the miracle spread quickly, reaching even the underground sanctuaries. But not everyone viewed the development with optimism. The Council of Elders, the governing body of the Zenny, summoned Zaila and Adrian to an emergency hearing. The council chamber, carved into the heart of a massive geode, glittered with faintly glowing crystals. The air was tense as the elders, Their faces, lined with age and distrust, stared down at the pair. "You violated protocol," Elder Caleb intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber. "You brought an alien into our midst without authorization, and now you've allowed him to tamper with our planet's ecosystem." Zaila stepped forward, her chin held high. "With all due respect, Elder Caleb, our ecosystem was already collapsing. Dr. Clark's spores are the only reason we're seeing any recovery at all." "And what of the long-term consequences?" another elder demanded. "How can we trust that these spores won't cause further damage? How can we trust him?" Adrian raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I understand your concerns, but I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for your cooperation. If we work together, we can save Theros V. If we don't, well, you know what happens." The chamber erupted into heated debate, the elders divided between those who supported Adrian's efforts and those who feared his intentions. As the arguments raged on, Zaila glanced at Adrian, her voice low. "They'll never agree to this. Not unanimously." Adrian met her gaze, his expression grim. "Then we'll have to convince them another way." The council meeting dragged on for hours, the elders' voices rising and falling in a cacophony of mistrust, fear, and stubborn pride. Zaila and Adrian stood silently at the center of the chamber, their patience wearing thin as the debate spiraled into chaos. It became increasingly clear that the council was fractured, unable, or unwilling to reach a consensus. "We should never have abandoned the sanctuaries," one elder barked. "Surface-level intervention is a fool's errand." "And what do you suggest?" another elder shot back. "That we sit underground and suffocate like cowards while the planet dies above us?" Elder Caleb slammed his staff against the crystalline floor, sending a sharp reverberation through the chamber. "Enough." His stern gaze fell on Zaila and Adrian. "You've created division among us, Dr. Marek. And you, human, have brought alien technology to our world without understanding its consequences." Zaila stepped forward, her silver eyes blazing with defiance. "The consequences of doing nothing are extinction, Elder Caleb. You speak of consequences as if we have a choice, but we don't. This is survival. If you want to sit in your sanctuaries and debate while the last breath of air leaves our lungs, then so be it. But I won't." Adrian glanced at her, clearly impressed by her boldness. He took a step forward, addressing the council in an even tone. "I didn't come here to divide your people. I came here because I know what it feels like to watch your world crumble. Earth was on the brink of collapse once, just like Theros V. The spores worked for us. They saved us. They can save you too, but only if you let them." Elder Caleb's lips tightened. "And what do you expect in return for your so-called generosity, human? What is the price of this salvation?" Adrian hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "There is no price. My mission isn't about profit or conquest. It's about helping worlds like yours avoid the mistakes we made." The council murmured among themselves, the weight of Adrian's words hanging heavily in the chamber. But Zaila could sense the doubt lingering in the air, the deep-seated mistrust of outsiders that had been ingrained in the Zeni for generations. Finally, Elder Caleb spoke again. "We will consider your proposal, but until a decision is reached, all further deployment of these spores is to be halted." "That is the will of the council." Zaila's heart sank. "Halted? But we're already seeing progress." "The council has spoken," Caleb interrupted, his voice cold and final. "You are dismissed." Zaila stormed out of the council chamber, her frustration boiling over. She could feel Adrian's footsteps behind her as she made her way back to the lab, her fists clenched at her sides. "They'll debate until we're dead," she muttered bitterly. Adrian jogged to keep up with her. "I noticed. Bureaucracy is the same everywhere, I guess." "This isn't bureaucracy," Zaila snapped. "This is cowardice." She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. "We don't have time for their endless debates, Adrian. The planet is dying now, not weeks from now, not months from now. If they won't act, we will." Adrian studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You're talking about defying the council? Why not? It's not like they've done anything to save us." "That's a dangerous move," Adrian said carefully. "If they catch us, they'll see me as a threat, and they'll see you as a traitor." Zaila's jaw tightened. Let them. I'm not going to let my people die because of their stubbornness. Are you with me or not? Adrian didn't hesitate. I'm with you. The Spore's second deployment was carried out in secret. Zaila and Adrian worked tirelessly through the night, calibrating the drones and programming their flight paths to target the most devastated regions of the planet. Reinish, despite his initial reluctance, eventually joined them, unable to deny the promise of what they were trying to achieve. You're both insane, he muttered as he helped load the drones with spore canisters. If the Council finds out about this, we're all dead. Then let's make sure they don't find out, Zaila replied curtly. The drones launched under the cover of darkness, their engines whisper-quiet as they ascended into the toxic skies. Zaila watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest. This has to work, she whispered. It will, Adrian said, his voice steady. It has to. The following days brought both triumph and tension. The spores began to take hold across the planet, regenerating soil, purifying water, and revitalizing vegetation at an unprecedented rate. The air grew cleaner, the skies less choked with smog. Small pockets of wildlife, thought to be extinct, began to reappear, their fragile forms emerging cautiously into the reborn landscapes. But the Council was not blind to what was happening. Reports of unauthorized spore deployments reached their ears, and it didn't take long for them to trace the activity back to Zaila's lab. The Council's enforcers arrived without warning, their armored figures storming the lab and seizing Zaila, Adrian, and Reinish. The three of them were dragged before the Council once more, this time in chains. You defied a direct order, Elder Caleb said, his voice icy with fury. You endangered our people and undermined the authority of this council. Explain yourselves. Zaila met his gaze without flinching. I saved our people. If that's a crime, then so be it. Caleb's eyes narrowed. You've gambled with the future of our species. How do you know these spores won't cause irreversible harm? Because they already work. Zaila shot back. Go outside, Caleb. Breathe the air. Look at the black scar. It's healing. The only harm being done is by you and your refusal to act. Adrian stepped forward, his chains clinking softly. You don't have to trust me, he said, addressing the entire council. But you can't argue with the results. Theros V is recovering. That's not conjecture, that's fact. If you stop us now, you're not saving your people. You're dooming them. The chamber fell silent. For a moment, Zaila dared to hope that they had finally gotten through to the elders. But then Caleb's voice rang out, cold and unyielding. You have violated the sanctity of this council and endangered our people's future. For that, you will face judgment. Zaila, Adrian, and Reinish were imprisoned in the deepest levels of the sanctuaries, their labs seized and their work halted. But even as they sat in their dark, damp cell, whispers of their actions began to spread. The Zeni people were not blind to what was happening on the surface. They could see the skies clearing, the plants regrowing, the wildlife returning. And they began to question the council's authority. It started as quiet murmurs in the underground corridors, but soon, those murmurs grew louder. Groups of Zeni began to rally around Zaila's cause, demanding that the spores be deployed across the entire planet. The council, faced with growing dissent, struggled to maintain control. The underground sanctuaries of Theros V were normally places of quiet despair, their dimly glowing fungal walls reflecting the stagnation of a dying world. But in the weeks following the secret spore deployment, those caverns pulsed with a new energy. Words spread like wildfire. The skies above the black scar had cleared, the poison lakes were turning blue, and the first green stalks of vegetation were emerging from the toxic ground. The Zeni people, resigned for years to their slow extinction, began to hope. They whispered Zaila's name in the shadows, telling stories of her defiance against the council and her partnership with the mysterious human, Adrian. For the first time in decades, their pride was eclipsed by desperation and the glimmer of salvation. Small groups of rebels began to form. At first, they were careful, spreading the word in hushed tones, evading the enforcers who patrolled the sanctuaries. But as the signs of recovery grew undeniable, so did their boldness. The people demanded that the spores be deployed across the planet, and many began to openly defy the council's decrees. Zaila sat on the cold, damp floor of her cell, her silver eyes reflecting the faint bioluminescence of the fungal growths along the walls. She had no sense of time here, only the endless cycle of waiting, listening, and thinking. Adrian sat across from her, leaning against the rough stone wall, his green eyes tired but alert. Rhinish, their reluctant co-conspirator, was curled up in a corner, muttering about the council's stubbornness and his growing list of regrets. Zaila broke the silence. "Do you think they'll execute us?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly the motivational pep talk I was hoping for." "I'm serious," she said, her voice low. "The council has to make an example of us. If they don't, they lose control." Adrian leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I don't know your people as well as you do, but I do know one thing. The truth is out. The people know the planet is healing. They've seen it with their own eyes. Killing us won't make that truth go away. And yet, truth hasn't saved us yet," she murmured. Before Adrian could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor outside their cell. Zaila stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to the empty space where her plasma blade once rested. The door creaked open, and a shadowy figure slipped inside, their face hidden beneath a dark hood. "Zaila," the figure whispered, their voice trembling with urgency. "It's me." Zaila frowned, squinting in the dim light. "Athen, what are you doing here?" The hooded figure pushed the hood back, revealing the face of a young Zenni woman with amber eyes and a determined expression. Athen was one of Zaila's former lab assistants, someone she hadn't seen since the lab was raided. "I came to warn you," Athen said. "The council is planning something. They've scheduled a public trial tomorrow. It's a performance, meant to discredit you and justify your execution." Zaila's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "And the people? They're furious," Athen said. "The council is trying to suppress the unrest, but it's spreading too quickly. Groups are gathering in the outer caverns, and they're planning to march on the council chamber during your trial. They want you freed." Adrian exchanged a glance with Zaila. "A rebellion?" Athen nodded. "Yes, and it's growing." Zaila's heart twisted. The thought of her people rising up against the council filled her with both hope and dread. If the rebellion succeeded, the spores could save Theros V. But if it failed, the council would likely retaliate with brutal force. "We need to act now," Zaila said, her voice firm. "If the people are willing to fight, we have to give them something to rally behind. A signal, a plan. Something?" Athen hesitated. "If you're caught trying to escape, they'll kill you on the spot." Zaila's gaze hardened. "Then we'll make sure we're not caught." Under the cover of darkness, Athen guided Zaila, Adrian, and Rhinish through the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the sanctuaries. The air was thick with tension, every distant echo and shadow a potential threat. Adrian stayed close to Zaila, his senses on high alert. "You're sure this route is safe?" he whispered. "It's a maintenance passage," Athen replied quietly. "The enforcers rarely patrol it. But if we're caught, we're dead." As they crept through the tunnel, Zaila's mind raced. She had spent her entire life working to save her planet, and now everything rested on the shoulders of a rebellion she hadn't even intended to start. When they finally emerged into an abandoned storage cavern, Zaila let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The cavern was vast, its walls lined with stacks of old machinery and rusting equipment. A group of Zenni rebels was waiting for them, their faces lit by the soft glow of handheld lanterns. The leader of the group stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered Zenni male with a scar running down one side of his face. He inclined his head respectfully. "Dr. Marek, Dr. Clark, you've given us hope when the council gave us none. We stand with you." Zaila nodded, a surge of determination coursing through her. "Thank you. But if we're going to succeed, we need to act quickly. The spores are ready, but the council won't let us deploy them. We need to take control of the central spire." The central spire was the heart of the sanctuary's infrastructure, a towering structure of crystal and metal that housed the environmental systems and communication networks. If they could seize it, they could override the council's lockdown and deploy the spores planet-wide. "It's heavily guarded," the rebel leader said. But we have people on the inside. If we time this right, we can take it. Then let's not waste any time, Zaila said. The assault on the central spire was swift and brutal. The rebels, armed with makeshift weapons and stolen enforcer gear, overwhelmed the guards with sheer numbers and determination. Zaila and Adrian led the charge, navigating the chaotic battle with a singular focus. Reaching the spire's control room, Adrian's human adaptability and resourcefulness proved invaluable. He improvised traps and distractions, using his knowledge of technology to disable security systems and reroute power away from the Council's defenses. Zaila, meanwhile, fought with the precision and grace of someone who had nothing left to lose. Her plasma blade, recovered from the Council's armory, cut through the Enforcer's ranks as she pressed toward the control room. When they finally reached their destination, Zaila wasted no time accessing the spire's control panel. Her fingers flew across the console, inputting commands to override the lockdown and initiate the planet-wide deployment of the spores. Adrian stood guard at the door, his makeshift weapon at the ready. "How long will this take?" he asked, glancing back at her. "Just a few more seconds," she replied. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a squad of enforcers stormed in. Adrian raised his weapon, but it was clear they were outnumbered. Zaila's heart raced as she hit the final command. The spore canisters, loaded into drones across the planet, began to launch into the atmosphere. "It's done," she shouted. Adrian grinned, but the moment was short-lived. The enforcers surrounded them, their weapons aimed. "Don't move," one of them barked. As the spores began to spread across the skies of Theros V, the rebellion reached its climax. The people, emboldened by the sight of their world beginning to heal, surged into the streets of the sanctuaries, overwhelming the enforcers and demanding the Council's surrender. But Zaila and Adrian's fates remained uncertain. The tension in the Council chamber was palpable. Outside, the roar of the rebellion grew louder, the cries of the Zeni people echoing through the crystalline walls. Elder Caleb stood rigid at the center of the chamber, his staff trembling in his grasp as the ground beneath his feet seemed to shake. "It's over," muttered Elder Joran, a frail but sharp-eyed member of the Council. "The people have turned against us. If we don't act now, we will act," Caleb barked, his voice sharp with desperation. "The rebellion will be crushed. Order will be restored." "Order?" Joran scoffed. "This is no longer about order, Caleb. The people have seen what the spores can do. They've seen hope, and they will not give it up, not for us, not for anyone." Caleb slammed his staff against the floor, his opalescent skin gleaming with fury under the soft, crystalline light. "Hope is a dangerous illusion. The humans' technology is a weapon. If we allow it to spread unchecked, it will destroy us. You've all seen the historical records. Aliens bring nothing but ruin. History," Elder Toller said softly, "will judge us not for protecting tradition, but for failing to save our people when we had the chance." Before Caleb could respond, the chamber doors burst open, and a wave of Zeni rebels poured inside, their faces grim with determination. Leading them was the rebel commander, scarred, imposing, and utterly unyielding. Caleb's guards stepped forward, weapons drawn, but the commander raised a hand. "No blood will be spilled here today unless you force it." Elder Joran stepped forward, addressing the rebels. "What do you want?" The commander's voice was steady. "Freedom for Zaila, Adrian Clark, and all those who have fought to save our world. The Council will step down, effective immediately. The people will decide their own future." Caleb laughed bitterly. "You think the people are capable of governing themselves? They can barely keep themselves alive." "They're keeping themselves alive now," a voice shouted from the crowd. Caleb froze as a familiar figure emerged from the ranks of the rebels. Zaila, her silver eyes blazing with defiance. She and Adrian had been freed during the uprising and had wasted no time rallying the rebels to march on the Council. "This ends now, Caleb," Zaila said. "The people have spoken. Stand down, or be swept aside." For a moment, the elder's defiance faltered. He looked into Zaila's eyes and saw the fire there, a fire that echoed the will of the Zeni people. Finally, with a deep, shuddering breath, he lowered his staff. "You've doomed us all," he muttered. "No," Zaila said, stepping closer. We've given ourselves a chance. With the council deposed and the rebellion victorious, the Zeni people turned their attention to the task of rebuilding. Zaila and Adrian became the central figures in this effort, their partnership symbolizing a new era of cooperation and hope. The spores continued to spread across Theros V, their regenerative properties transforming the once barren landscapes into vibrant, living ecosystems. Forests of glowing, bioluminescent trees began to take root, their leaves filtering toxins from the air. Rivers ran clear again, their waters teeming with alien fish that had returned from the brink of extinction. For the first time in generations, the Zeni could walk the surface of their planet without fear of suffocation. But not all was peaceful. The rebellion had left scars, both physical and emotional. The sanctuaries were in disarray, and the people struggled to adapt to their new reality. Some clung to the old ways, resenting the changes brought about by Zaila and Adrian's efforts. Others questioned the long-term effects of the spores, fearing that they might bring unintended consequences. Adrian, too, wrestled with doubts. Though the terraforming had been a success, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had overlooked something, some hidden variable that might come back to haunt them. Late one night, Zaila found Adrian standing on the edge of a newly regrown forest, staring up at the stars. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint, sweet scent of alien blossoms. "You're thinking too much again," she said, joining him. Adrian smiled faintly. "Habit of mine. Can't seem to turn it off." Zaila studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. "You should be proud of what we've accomplished. Look around you, Adrian. This is life. We did this." "We did," he admitted. "But what if it's not enough? What if we missed something?" Zaila stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've given my people something they never had before, a second chance. That's more than enough." He turned to her, his green eyes meeting her silver ones. For a moment, the weight of their shared struggle seemed to melt away, leaving only the quiet connection between them. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "So have you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Their faces drew closer, the boundary between their worlds dissolving in the warmth of their shared breath. And in that moment, amidst the rebirth of a dying world, they kissed, a union of two souls bound by hope, determination, and the fragile beauty of a planet reborn. But even as the forests regrew and the skies cleared, the shadows of doubt lingered. Reports began to trickle in from the outer regions of Theros V, regions where the spores had taken root in unexpected ways. In one area, an overgrowth of vegetation had consumed an entire settlement, its roots burrowing deep into the ground and destabilizing the cavern systems below. In another, strange, mutated creatures had begun to appear, their forms twisted and unnatural. Zaila and Adrian were called to investigate. What they found chilled them both to the core. The spores, designed to adapt to their environment, had begun to evolve,